Hello, everyone. Welcome to csoli.com. I'm your host, Yavor Zlatev, and in this particular podcast, we are here with Tenable, and we want to learn more about IT and especially IoT and OT environment. Today, we are here with Dominic Storey, who is an OT cybersecurity architect, and with Chris Baker, who is OT Business Development Manager for Europe. They're going to give us very interesting insights about how Tenable is helping OT environments from perspective of exposure management. Hello, guys. How are you doing?
Hi, guys. How are you?
Yeah, all good, thanks. Thank you for having us.
Shall we start with a short presentation of the solution, so our audience to have an idea what Tenable can offer? I'm sure that it's a lot.
Very good. Okay, sure. So let me spend a few minutes just talking about generally what we do, what the issues that we solve with Tenable OT and Tenable One and exposure management. Okay, so really it's about this title, effectively managing cyber exposure in a converged IT, OT, IoT environment. Now, I don't know how many of you sometimes feel like the deer in front of the car. One of the things Chris and I have found in many visits to customers is just how sometimes paralyzed they feel because OT seems such a big subject, such a big issue. They may well have, many of our customers have really good and proactive security in the IT environment, but OT is just something they haven't got their arms around. And so how do we actually, deal with this issue? How do we move them and help them on the journey to making sure their OT environments are secure as well? And, when you look at some recent history, one thing that we've seen change is what I'd call executive visibility of OT. And this has been caused by more and more of these attacks that are happening, gaining traction, gaining news, in the minds of CISOs, in the minds of CFOs and CEOs, that these attacks can be really, really damaging to business. Whether it's early on in Sandworm or Lazarus Killnet or Foxnet recently, which really was a war. A piece of warware, if you like, to take part in the war between Ukraine and Russia, to actually damage their infrastructure, and the Russians have done the same into the Ukrainians. But then we see things like the dam in is Norway, wasn't it, Chris? Norway,
yes.
I think it was, isn't it? Reservanet Dam, where there was just an unprotected SCADA-facing Windows PC on the internet, it's kind of like tying a goat to a post with the foxes around, right? It's of crazy, right? And not surprisingly, that thing fell very quickly, and then people could access, bad actors could access the SCADA systems controlling the dam system.
I think just to add to this, is that obviously a lot of these are, what we're seeing is a lot of these, although they have an impact of the breach, and we've got JLR, Jaguar Land Rover in 2025. They obviously stopped production, but it wasn't actually an OT attack. It was the interdependencies of the IT domain connected into the OT domain, and that affecting it. So we can see this happening a lot in terms of actually the IT devices and the IT networks connected in, and there may be segmentation and separation, but ultimately, in the case of Jaguar Land Rover, when you run a just-in-time type operation where actually there isn't enough time to be able to factor in that resilience, because it's all about that capability and framework of the way they operate, then actually what we're seeing is a lot of the attacks and impacts happening are as a result of IT exploits laterally moving into OT.
Yeah.
So from what I understand, if I can add to that, it's super important. And what's Tenable, it's offering is practically coverage of the IT and OT environment. As the IT is more, let's say, it's the entrance door for potential attacks, to the OT environment. Is that what you want to give as a message?
Yeah. So look, we'll cover this in more of the slides as we go on from this. But when we talk about exposure, and exposure is going to be talked about in a couple of throughout this presentation, is that exposure is essentially identifying the preventable cyber risk that has a high likelihood of exploit by attackers and potentially material impact on business. Now, to understand exposure, you have to understand all assets in your organization. That doesn't just mean your controllers. It also means what is connected further up as part of that, and the dependencies associated with that as a business and as a business function. So that does mean OT and IT, but also your IoT assets and even your cloud assets from that point. So, as everything becomes interoperable and have their dependencies, you have to look at it as a whole. So that's why this whole, we talk about IT OT convergence, but the fact is that has been happening for a long time. It's just due to driving digitization and wanting to use data in a better way, we're seeing what was traditionally in the past siloed, not anymore.
And I just think about one last thing before we move on, and that is, in an IT environment, you have a disaster recovery plan. You can just, restore from backup. You can transfer function to an alternative data center. You have options. But if you're talking about a blast furnace, people don't have a spare blast furnace. They don't have a spare factory. That isn't possible to do. And the difference between an IT attack and an OT attack is often the difference between, I've just got a virus and I now have to go and reformat the server and reinstall it, to bricking the device that is unrecoverable and it has to be replaced. And oh, by the way, this transformer that's just got damaged is a 6-month lead time. It's completely different in the consequences of these attacks. That's what the CISOs are waking up to. So it's useful sometimes just to think about, think in the way of an attacker, right? What's an attacker typically do? How do they get to you, right? That attacker will spend a lot of time identifying the target, identifying what it is that they're going to achieve, and then they'll poke around the surface of your business to see where they can exploit. And it always comes down to two core things. Is there an identity? Is there a user account I can exploit here? Is there a way in, maybe from an initial exploit that gets me physically, gets me the computer access I need? And then is there an account I can exploit to gain further access? And once I'm there, I can move laterally. I can establish presence, permanence, and then it's rinse and repeat. It's just continuing doing that, elevating and taking action. But it's important to recognize that the desired outcome for an attacker typically falls in three core methods or three core domains. They'll either want to take data out, and that's your intellectual property or particular secrets or whatever it is that you have. It may be simply just to stop your business until you pay ransom. Or thirdly, if it's a political or a nation state thing, it just may be to disrupt your normal operation, to stop you, deny you access to your services and so on. It's an aerial denial attack, if you like. So once we understand that's what people do. It's important to think like an attacker and understand how they are actually doing things. So what can we learn? And like Chris said earlier, attacks don't normally start in OT. OT systems tend to be relatively well protected from general remote access, much more than the porous surface of an IT environment. However, people come in through the IT side, and they'll do so through credential stealing, phishing, typically, or there may be some vulnerabilities that get exploited to allow somebody in, but it's typically a social engineering method in which they gain access into your environment. So you've got to have the visibility into the IT systems and identities in the OT domain as well as in the IT domain, because remember, they can exploit IT systems in OT, right? Now, it may well be that you just can't stop. You can't shut down initial access. You can't just put the wall around your business and stop people getting in, because you've got to do business with the outside world. So it may not be possible to stop this, right? So if you can't stop access, you've got to think about how you can segment your network to prevent lateral movement. Now, one thing Chris and I have often found that when we talk to people, their IT networks are really well segmented. They've got good VLANs, good VRFs, all of that stuff. The OT networks, often inherited, are flat as a pancake. And literally, once you're on it, you can go anywhere within it. So that's one of the biggest challenges they have. And one of the earliest projects we see most companies doing is the segmentation projects on their network to try and actually build that up to be more protected in that way. Attacks do exploit identity, right? They will utilize privileged accounts. Once you've got that privileged account, you can move laterally, get to another machine, exploit that, get another privileged account on that, and then gain access to the systems that you need to be able to do. So you've got to understand permissions, relationships. You've got to understand identities within your business. And once you understand and you can see all of those things together, you've got a good chance of doing something about that, right? And then, recognize also that point solutions in both IT and OT, but we're talking about OT mainly, they're insufficient to stop attacks. And we'll talk more about why that is as we go on. One of the reasons in a lot of OT environments is that there's still persistent view that you should never do anything other than passive connections into OT. In other words, listen only, never block, never actively query things. That means that you've literally got one hand tied behind your back. The attacker's not going to be respecting that. They're going to be probing everything on your network, right? So the issue that we often see is these point solutions create silos. You buy a product to do a particular job in OT, right? Or you buy a product to do cloud security or web security, identity security, server security, workstation security. All of these are, and certainly if you've gone for a best of breed approach and different vendors for each of these, they're not connected. They're not linked into any particular way. And it generally means you've got a different state of maturity amongst all of these products. And the things that you're limited by is the number of people you've got to run them. Because I've yet to see a company say, oh, I need 10 different products, and therefore I must have 10 more people, 10 more staff to do it. Staff doesn't scale in the way that people like to scale and buy different products, right? The same people have to run multiple products. They can't really relate across one product to another. And how many times, Chris, have we seen people then taking a spreadsheet or a screenshot out of something or printing something out and then trying to relate that to another application and another console? And that's really difficult. So what you really need is to be at the top of this, but you don't have the resources to do so. So that becomes a big challenge for organizations. And of course, our adversaries, they love silos. They love silos because they can move laterally across these different domains. And of course, they can rely on the fact that visibility and linkage between those different applications is not present. And because it's not present, it means that there may not be picked up moving laterally. They may have been picked up or there may be a log from last Tuesday about some access somewhere, but it doesn't actually link into the next system that that person has actually gained access to. Maybe that privilege escalation wasn't picked up in that way. And so this is how they can move around in this way. There isn't technical context and there's no business context. Now let's explain the difference between these two things. Okay. So a technical context of something would be, yes, this is a PLC. This is a workstation. We're going to assign a risk value to this workstation, to this PLC. The business concept is this PLC is controlling the blast furnace, or the one I like to use is this PLC controls a nitric acid bath and this PLC controls a water rinse. If somebody compromises those two systems, I'd rather be in the room when the water system is compromised and I get a flooded water rather than flooded nitric acid over my feet. That burns my legs off, right? So understanding the business context and how it links to the systems is just as important. And being able to link that is vital. So there's unseen exposure that you can get from I think of it as the Swiss cheese model of safety, right? There are all of these holes aligning in these systems, and if they're not visible to you, then you've got paths through which the attackers can take and probe for, but you can't actually track.
It links back to from a context point that you might have these different silos, right? But there's no context between them, and they will all report metrically risk in different ways, right? So CISOs and organizations are having trouble trying to actually understand the data and why that's important between the context between each silo. And that could be in an OT environment, your identities, your endpoint misconfigurations, it could be your asset inventory, it could be obviously your vulnerability management side of things. So there's lots of different aspects to this, and this applies from a whole organizational point, but from an OT point, that it's having might be different data sources, but without context and understanding between them, you don't know where to focus first from an exposure point. What is really going to meaningfully reduce risk from a business function point?
Yeah. What I should say here is that you have opened really an important question, which is the actual architecture of one IT and OT environment, because what you have been showing as different vendors working together, it's a very common case in many businesses, and they're using different type of vendors, believing that exactly one vendor can do one type of job, another vendor can do another type of job, which comes more as a vendor management instead of orchestrating all of that, which opens exactly these gaps. It's a challenge for CISOs, it's a challenge for the chief technology officers, for all of the IT managers, actually, which wants to close the potential gaps, even compliance gaps. So that's very interesting view of that problem.
I'd just like to add to that from that point is, we go back to that first slide where we just see the deer in the headlights. Some organizations have started this journey already. The problem, what they're getting is actually the data that they're getting out is not as useful or as meaningful based on their specific environments, in terms of, okay, I have all these vulnerabilities, we might be able to prioritize them, but actually what is truly exploitable? So in this scenario, we have to understand what are the attack paths into this environment to actually impact that operation, right?
And what is important from business point of view, which you have also mentioned, because that's very, very important. Actually, to know on the technical side, it's one thing, and it could look important, but on the business side, it's more important, because that's actually our guidance, comes from the business side. If it has a big business impact, that means the technology has to be better protected. If it doesn't have big business impact, it could be, I wouldn't say less protected, but let's say that the evaluation for the risk on the particular system could take different directions.
Hold that thought, because that thought. I'm going to cover that off on a slide in particular, but let me just continue for a second and pick up on what you were saying, Yavor, about architecture, and that is when you look at a modern OT environment, it isn't just OT. Right. This is also something we've seen the people not quite really grasping. There's OT applications, there's OT vendors in there, but there's lots of IT equipment. There's PCs, there's IoT equipment. Every site I've seen has got cameras, has got badging systems, has got HVAC, got air conditioning, has got PDUs and for power distribution, all of that stuff. And half the applications in there are cloud-based anyway. So also the traditional idea that OT's segregated somehow from the rest of the internet isn't really true anymore. It's just not really adding up, right? So and we still see some systems being sold as this is a great OT system to protect your network. Well, does it actually understand vulnerabilities in the Windows machines in your environment? No, because that's not OT, that's IT. So actually, then you're blind in that plant because you're putting in something that can only see half the equipment. So you see what I mean? You've really got to be able to understand everything in this domain, in this site, so that you can relate everything together in a consistent way, not using separate products, not using a risk value of 1 to 10 for one system and then 1 to 100 for another and A to Z for the third. It's got to be consistent if you want to make sense of it. So this is really where Tenable OT comes in. So Tenable OT really does 4 key things. It solves one of the problems that people have still in OT, and that is it gives them a way of automating their inventory in an open manner. Okay, so and Chris and I, we could if we were paid a penny for every time we came across somebody with a spreadsheet with their assets, we would be very rich people. We really would be.
That's a very nice example.
It happens a lot because they haven't got around to figuring out how to gather this information together. So we will provide you with a way of automating that inventory, collecting it in a safe and efficient manner, and providing you with an open and indexable database where you can then dial in your exposure and vulnerabilities. You can then dial into that thing, what people are trying to do against them, the bad actors, what they're trying to do. So you get exposure management and security monitoring. And then these link into systems to give you true enterprise analytics, to understand not just information such as what's happening from a security perspective, but what's happening from a configuration perspective. Have you opened up something because something's misconfigured? How are your relationships between your third-party vendors when they update something? Did they update all of the equipment as they said they did? Or are there some mistakes they've made and maybe updated the wrong PLC? All of that kind of information is into enterprise analytics in our view. And that can go into a system to allow you to understand the real state of your plant or whatever your OT environment is. And an OT environment can apply just as well to a data center, by the way, which has requirements for taking heat away, power distribution. It can apply just as easily to a supermarket, which has a cold chain. They have to keep refrigeration of goods. So all of that stuff's OT and IoT equipment. So people who think they don't have anything to do with OT, they almost certainly do have OT in their environments. Okay, so the 2 key aspects of understanding these 4 things are how we do discovery and how we do analytics. And we're going to talk a little bit about that now. So we utilize a hybrid method of asset discovery. And a hybrid method involves passively monitoring the network, but also actively querying devices on the network. And they overcome the limitations you'll get if you're just listening alone. Listening just means you're at the mercy of whatever's in the traffic. You can't see anything more than is happening between machines. And a good example of why this may be bad for you would be if you were to consider that once your plant is in run mode, all you're going to see in the traffic-wise is temperature readings, strain gauge readings, pressure readings, conveyor belt, number of widgets made. You see nothing about what the equipment is and what its vulnerabilities are. The information's not there in the traffic. So what we champion is the ability to look like an engineering station, where the engineering station can say, tell me what your resources are, Mr. Controller. Tell me what you got. And then we can make exactly those queries in a safe manner, get that information back so we can then build a profile of what that equipment actually is. So we do that, but we can also import data from your existing environment. You may have 30,000 records in a Maximo database. You can import that into Tenable OT, and we'll start working with that data immediately. You might have cameras connected up to video management systems. We can read that video management system and pull out all of the camera data from there too. Similarly, we have Windows devices, sensors, and so on that allow us to understand what you've got. And once we have it, we build you the asset inventory, analyze how bad actors can access this information, and then generate true exposure views for you. So once we have that information, we also acknowledge the fact that you don't have infinite resource to process it. So we've got to somehow purify this information to make it relatable to you so that you can deal with what's worst, deal with the risks that need to be dealt with first. And one of the ways we do that is through pre-correlation. So we'll take all the vulnerabilities we've discovered, but rather than allow you or then make that your job in figuring out what you need to do about them, we'll pre-correlate them with the threats that we see out there in the market today. So there might be two vulnerabilities of equal score, but we know one vulnerability is being actively exploited by, say, a Russian hacker group or a Chinese hacker group or whatever. And then we will score those differently and generate for you a vulnerability triage point that allows you to choose the assets which have highest risk to you, and therefore fix what matters most to you.
That means to change the priority, which is important, especially in big environments, practically to fix the devices that has dangerous vulnerabilities.
Exactly. But this is updated on a daily basis. And this is a very large compute model that we run 24/7 by 365. So we're constantly correlating and looking at what's happening. We've got some 200 different data points we measure for each vulnerability to record into that to actually calculate our VPR scores. Okay, so very, very powerful way to reduce your workloads. And the next thing to do is then think about everything from a risk perspective. So there's two ways of doing this. One of them is to use a risk automation method, and this is what I'd call machine automation. So with this, we can look at every asset, compute a risk score for that asset, and then deliver to you a consolidated risk metric, which allows you to view your entire estate and say, well, am I more at risk today than I was yesterday? What's changed? And I can view each site and then look at the risk scores for the assets in those sites and then understand why that asset has got the risk score it has. And that machine automation is a powerful way of giving you a triage point, but it's not the only way. Because one thing we've found is that everyone's got their own favorite risk subsystem, their own way of thinking about risk. If I am a telecoms company, my risk calculations may be different than an electricity company or a manufacturer. So so hold that thought for a second, because that becomes important. The advantage of being able to understand risk from a multi-domain perspective as well is one of resource allocation for you. Because if I'm a CISO, I want to understand, I've probably got 10 teams underneath me. One's for identities, one's for cloud, one's for OT, one's for web, and so on. Am I allocating the appropriate resource to each team? What's my blended threat looking like across all of those domains? And one of the things that we can do is actually deliver to you pie charts like this or charts like this, which actually tell you what your resource scheduling's like, what your resource management's like. Should you invest more, invest less in particular areas?
I think,
but
just,
yeah,
Chris, to add to that, we're obviously, that's showing an overall score based on function, but that could be based on production line, sites, vendor, these sorts of things. But actually, you can manage it against your own SLAs as well. So it's giving you sort of a real world sort of business view in terms of actually, obviously that CISO view in terms of where do I need to focus my time, my energy in terms of prioritizing the limited resources that I have to be able to reduce risk.
Yeah, most CISOs that we talk to, they'll start the year with, okay, I've got these 3 strategic goals given to me by my boss, and I'm going to achieve these with these business plans throughout the year. I'm going to set measurable SLAs against each of these strategic goals. I want to see how I'm doing about it, and this gives you the ability to actually start to understand what that means to you. And if you need to change course, then you've got the data to do so.
Yeah, it's a challenge for them to actually transfer the business goals into practical technical implementation under a limited budget. That is important for everyone in the shoes of Chief Information Security Officer. And the reporting from technological point of view, it's important. So based on the business priorities in each type of business, they will be able to evaluate what has to be fixed first.
Yes.
Not just from perspective of vulnerabilities, but overall affecting the organization.
I'm glad you asked that, because one of the other things that we can do is build in your own risk models into this, because as I said before, different companies have different ways of considering business risk.
Exactly.
So it may be that you want to use risk model, and this is where I can look at what's the reputational damage of something in this plant fail, what's the asset financial cost to my blast furnace should this controller fail. What about an interruption of service if I'm a telco or I'm a power provider? What about if I'm water company? What about health and safety? Who could die if something goes wrong here? And of course,
exactly.
Similarly with environmental impact. So it may be that you want to actually capture this information for every asset and map that onto the assets. And what that means is, rather than just seeing a risk score like a numerical risk that you might have, and this is the automatic approach that I talked about earlier, you can now have a more nuanced risk model, which is your RAISE risk model, which could enable you to ask the question, give me my top 10 remediation targets where I've got $1 million worth of asset loaded risk, or would involve 2 or 3 fatalities if something happened. And this way enables you to think about how the business functions, what the risks are to the business should you have a failure in a particular way caused by an attack, and then deal with that accordingly.
It makes sense.
Yeah. And part of being able to do that well is to understand the time bad actors and how they're actually gaining access into your environment. In other words, for monitoring. Now, we know you've probably got an IDS, and we know you've probably got firewalls and so on. But many of those systems know nothing about the assets that you have. They know everything about the IP address that's in the attack source and destination, but they don't know it's a PLC. They don't know it's a Windows machine. They don't know this information. But guess what? We do know that. We do know what you've got because we've discovered it. We've mapped it. We profiled it. We understand exactly what the evolutionary history of that machine looks like. We understand what its vulnerabilities are. So when we put and understand intrusions and various things like that, we can give you the critical context you're lacking, such as, this isn't against just an IP, it's against the backplane, it's against a module on a critical backplane that's got 4 PLCs on it. And if you lose one of them, you're going to lose all of them. And that completely changes the view of what that event may mean. So context, as you know, is everything in this case. And that's one of the powerful things we can do. And we will actually measure these 5 key areas. We look for configuration drifts, your changes in configuration of machine, uploads, downloads, when they happened, where they came from, who did them. If there was any hardware changes, such as module exchanges and so on. If there are any modules which are depreciated, which are now end of life. If you've seen traffic spikes, deviations, communications outbound, which is a good indicator of CNC and compromise in that way, network threats and so on. And of course, across wider SCADA networks, we can clock and measure things like remote control sequences to start and stop processes in these environments from unauthorized sources. So this gives me the way of understanding what in real time is happening in my network, and being able to map that to my risk base, my understanding what I have is really key.
May I ask a question
Yeah,
regarding
sure.
the industries where actually the product is being used? Because I saw in many slides SCADA systems. Does that mean that it has a huge use in the energy sector?
Yes.
But not only, because obviously IoT and OT devices, they're everywhere around us, practically in almost every industry. It is the question how the solution can help to industries that they must be compliant in order to provide unstoppable process and not to affect the environment in case something happen. Because the risk, it's the business risk and the human risk. It's at the end of the day, if something happen, if something stops working on such type of devices. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah,
Chris, go ahead.
So the regulated industries, typically C&I, so power industries. So that's whether that's generation, renewables, transmission, distribution. They've traditionally been probably the early adopters, right? They're regulated industries, obviously important to the country's infrastructure. Regulations have driven the need and their requirement to deploy solutions like this, and geopolitically, these environments are on the are on the list of sort of being watched. So, but regulations isn't just related to say C&I. We've seen, say, in Europe quite a lot around things like TSAX, which is a German automotive regulation where anybody that supplies to the German automotive industry has to comply with it. So there's others like NIS2 and Crisis, and the UK now is bringing out the CRA. So the regulations and frameworks have driven it, right? But we've seen other scenarios where actually data centers, for example, where they have services where they have to ensure that the operating temperatures are staying the same, and they need to be able to report of any deviations on that. So it's all related to making sure that the resilience is there across all these industries. Regulations is obviously making sure there's a framework in place and the standards in place. But I think what's happening is obviously there's a lot more, as we showed in that earlier slide, is that actually there's a lot more awareness around this now, and these industries are being impacted due to obviously everything that's going on in the world at the moment. So it's and regulations as a result is actually changing and evolving to adapt to this from that point. So there isn't, I would say, one vertical that doesn't have OT. It's just probably from an adoption perspective, power has probably been the early adopters, but we're seeing manufacturing and all these other verticals adopting tooling like this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Okay. Let me take you through a little bit about the architecture of how Tenable OT fits together, and what the elements are. So if we considered just the Purdue model as a way of describing the elements within most industrial environments, starting from level 0, which is the thing you're actually controlling, the process. The controllers was at level 1. Supervisory access, that's the area and operator stations to start and stop the processes. The site ops, the ERP, the site logistics, levels 3 and 4, and then enterprise. And so often the view is the IT/OT domain kind of sits L3 to L4, and that's where people have this L3.5 DMZ. Reality is OT and IT are actually pretty smeared across all of these, by the way, right? But the reality is, it's a good way of just thinking about it from a simplistic perspective. Now we have a set of sensors, and these sensors can sit at any of these levels, and their objective is to provide us the ability to listen to traffic and also interact with systems. So the sensors can query and the sensors can listen. So each of these sensors may be a completely separate small little industrial PC that sits in a cabinet. They can be Windows agents that sit on Windows machines, very common in a multi-homed environment. In DCS, you might have this environment. But the objective of these sensors is to do the measurement. And then the measurements are sent to our core platform, the ICP or Tenable OT appliance, for analysis. This is here where we analyze the traffic, analyze the queries returned to determine what your inventory is, to determine who's attacking you, to determine all of the things you want to know from a security perspective. Now, you may have more than one of these ICPs because you'd have one for each site. So as an organization with multiple sites, you would probably want to collect all of these ICP data, and that's why you've got this line, these multiple lines here just indicate you've got more than one more than one device feeding into an enterprise manager, which then gives us, if you like, a unified internal view within the organization of what's happening. So this is still sitting within the company, within the enterprise, but it just gives you unified view of everything. But what often organizations want to do then is take the results from these systems and feed it into our analytics platform. And that typically sits in the cloud, and that's Tenable One. If an organization...
If I may ask, Dominic, because I think this is important from architecture point of view,
yes.
Does it mean that the solution can be practically provisioned on-premise and can work in fully on-premise mode, or it can work in a hybrid mode, actually using Tenable One?
Yes,
how that works from architecture
very good
point of view?
It actually can, because if you want to stay entirely on-premise, you can take some of the core reporting functionality and move it on-premise and have that sit purely on premise, and that's where we use Tenable Security Center to do that. So some organizations we do work with will never ever use the cloud.
Yes, cloud,
right?
Yes, that's
and if
right.
that's the case, then we can fully support that. I put this architecture up because it's the most common one we're encountering, that most organizations, certainly in commercial business, not into, say, aero defense or anything like that, they will have cloud applications. They're using cloud. They're using Oracle. They're using, stuff that uses the cloud. Our architecture means that we never have a cloud connection happening in the OT side. It only ever happens at the IT side, where all the other cloud connections happen. So it's a safe method because it's probably what they're doing anyway. Okay. Now, anything they're doing internally for the traditional IT feeds into exactly the same platform to give them this converged IT, OT, IoT view. So that's the beauty of doing it. But should that have been on-prem, this would have just been on-prem as well. It's still IT, OT converged view. Okay.
Makes sense.
Yes. So what we really believe is important is this term to shift left. And what it really means is push your expenditure to proactive protection rather than reactive observation. In other words, if you're seeing an attack happen, it's probably already too late because, the damage is being done. It'd be much better if you can stop that attack from ever getting access into your environment. That's obviously the way you end up. If you can move from this side to that side, you'll be 3 times less likely to suffer a breach. Okay, so we've got lots of good data on this. IBM's got some excellent data on the cost of breach. Gartner have this as well. Nearly everyone agrees that if you can move to the left side of the breach line, you're actually doing you're saving and getting a much better return on investment for your security dollars spent. Okay, so this is what we always talk about with our approach, and our approach is one of exposure management. Look at the silos that most people have and put a platform in place that gives us a unification of each of these levels, whether it's visibility, insight, and action. That's what exposure management is really about. That visibility is make sure I can normalize across all of these systems, and rather than have A, B, C for one system, 1, 2, 3 for another, and 10, 20, 30 for a third, I now have a unified way of saying that an asset is an asset. This is its scoring. This is its risk. All of that stuff is unified across all platforms. The insight then is, what if I can mix all of these systems together, I can say, yeah, this identity is on this platform. This is a PLC. This is a HMI. I get to see the context, which allows me to make better business decisions. And finally is, what am I going to do with my data? That's about action. How can I mobilize my fixes, my patches, my workflows to make it more smooth, that I can actually address the issues and vulnerabilities and weaknesses I have in the business. And that's the 3 stages that we have with our exposure management platform. And the important thing about it is the sources of data. And I'll talk more about that on the last slide. But think of the art of the possible, where rather than just tell you, hey, you've got some vulnerabilities and these are your assets, I can say, this is how an attacker can escalate their privilege, move laterally to actually restart one of your devices. This is a valid path they can take. And maybe you can patch earlier on and therefore break that kill chain entirely. Or I can tell you in formalized way, these are the MITRE attack points that you've got in the environment that people can exploit. And once again, common language means common understanding. And lastly, we provide large language models in Tenable One, which can explain what this means in simple terms, in straightforward terms, so that there is no misunderstanding. And that is a queryable language model, which means you can query our systems to find what's happening and the relationships between machines in a much more powerful way. So exposure management really does one key thing very well. It takes the risk volume you've got, the number of events you've got, rather than it being something where you have a lot of events, you end up with a lot of incidents that you typically get when you're looking at, say, intrusion events. You might have 10,000 intrusion events. How many of those actually mean something's going to happen to your environment? Well, once you do expose rather than intrusion views or events, you get a naturally much better compression of data down to information. So what this typically means is much better visibility, a lot less SOC tickets, and a better return on investment. And this is what we've seen across lots of different customers who've been trialing our stuff before we'd actually gone live with it. So at the end of the day, the real advantage of what we're doing and how it helps you is this data that we're pulling in isn't just from our systems, but it's also from systems you may already have. You've probably got CrowdStrike in your environment, or Microsoft Sentinel, or Nozomi, or many other products. Wouldn't it be good if we could normalize that data too, to give you a complete view of everything you've got? So reusing all your existing tooling, as well as the tooling we provide you, to give you a common exposure graph, a common way of looking at the data and understanding the relationship between each machine, each attack, each vulnerability in a unified way. Really what Tenable One does.
I was going to ask you especially about such integrations, because nowadays they're crucially important. With the evolution of the SOAR technologies, the integration between different vendors are a very important part of actually establishing a good security operations center services, but also especially when a solution, a platform like yours can integrate with the diversity type of products which are available in each IT environment, which is a big challenge, because in one IT environment we could find one set of firewalls, in the other another set of firewalls, or one type of cloud platforms in one environment, another in another one, which is a big challenge indeed. And you have mentioned also some vendors which specialize in the monitoring of OT environment, like Nozomi, which is a vendor that actually specializes in that area. That means that you are working with niche players and such that are providing specific service related to OT. At least that's my understanding.
Exactly. The point is that a lot of vendors contribute really good things. Okay, I mean, Nozomi are good at certain things. Clarity are good at certain things. Sentinel's great at certain things, and so on. Why not take the very best of what they do, pull that data, so that if you have investments, you to and start again. What we're saying is you're at a certain point in your journey. Use what you've got, integrate it better.
Yeah,
it's the one ring that rules them all. No, it brings a very powerful way.
And as much as we would love you to use all the Tenable sensors, ultimately we know that's not always going to necessarily happen, because people have already made investments, right? And they can't change it from that point.
Exactly.
But equally, exposure management doesn't work if you're only relying on your own data. It has to pull in other sources of data that are in the environment from that point. So exposure management only works if you can only use your own sensors as a vendor, in this case Tenable, but other third parties as well in the environment, because we don't do endpoint security in terms of EDR, for example. But that is an important bit of information that needs to be pulled in to understand what's happening in those environments for misconfiguration points. What endpoints do have an EDR agent on it and what don't, versus what we can see from an inventory. So it's understanding those gaps and those, so we can understand the lateral movement and the identities between all these environments.
It makes full sense to me, and my questions were more about the integration with other technology, just because in every environment there are different vendors, as I have said, and it's there are legacy softwares even sometimes which are budgeted and purchased, for example, 2 years back, and they have to be used in a way. So that has answered one of my questions practically.
We have some scenarios where customers have other OT solutions as well as us. It's they use it for different models and different use cases. So we operate with everybody from that point.
Great. I think we're losing Dominic.
Sorry, Dom, Dom, your mic's broken up, mate.
Hello.
It's breaking up again.
No,
I think we're gone now.
Am I gone? Am I?
You're very echoey. So
we change.
Well, Yavor, that was the last slide anyway. So,
I mean, if that was the last slide, my questions would go more on the commercial aspect of using Tenable in IT and OT environment. Obviously, our focus in this particular podcast is the OT environment, and I would like to ask you, Chris, to give me some insights about the type of packages that the managers can use with Tenable. Is it monthly as a subscription, yearly? What are the options practically? We don't need details on the pricing side, just to know how it works from commercial architecture point of view. So, because there are some people who prefer, yearly subscriptions, others which are fine with monthly subscriptions, just because their resources are different every month.
So we are a vendor based on subscription models, and it's basically on annual now. We are a whole 100% channel, so the channel partner may do monthly, for example, from that point. But the way the licensing works for us is you can either look at Tenable OT as standalone or as part of Tenable One. The point is it's based on what assets you wish to protect. So we don't care how many sites you have or anything like that. It's based on everything that we've shown you comes as part of it in terms of the ability to use it. The only other considerations maybe is if you need hardware from us in the OT environment, which we can supply for that. So it's essentially if we look at a pure OT perspective, it's a license for the assets you wish to protect.
Yes.
And then you can either deploy that on your own hardware or your own virtual environments. And if you need hardware from us, we have that. But that's obviously an additional cost if that's required. Tenable One, again, is you allocate the licenses to the centers you want to use. So you could buy 10,000 licenses, you allocate 5,000 to IT, 5,000 to OT. But you have the model benefit that actually it's based on the cumulative amount you have. So actually you're gaining that same benefit.
Okay.
It's the same SKU. So actually it makes a lot of sense from a procurement perspective, just because it keeps it simple, because it's one SKU. And then you obviously combining the benefits of obviously having more than one sensor with us, and actually the cumulative number of assets benefits you commercially. So the more assets you have, the per asset cost comes down.
Makes sense. Makes sense. We don't have a lot of time till the end of the podcast. I'm not sure if Dominic would be able to show us a short demo of the console, how that looks like, because I'm interested to see that, to see some assets, how they look like from the perspective of Tenable on the console. If you're able to show some reporting, that's going to be also cool. Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
It's a different microphone now, but it might be a bit echoey, but hopefully we should be good. Right, bear with me.
It's good.
Yep.
Let's see whether this is going to work. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So let's pull up this new page. So this is Tenable OT.
So this could be a site view, for example. So this could be one manufacturing plant, for example.
Well, this is actually the enterprise manager. So this is all of the plants. Okay, so in this case, I've got two sites, London and Munich, and we're bringing this in to give you a unified view. So this would be an on-prem view of everything you've got. And then lastly, I'll show you the platform view. But what we'll start here because it'll give you the most detail. So often what people want to do is understand what the number of controllers they have, how many assets, how many vulnerabilities do they have. And if they want to, they can look at the scoring of each of these to understand what's happening. And it's clear that I've got a much higher score in London, so maybe I should investigate that first. By clicking on that London site, I single sign on onto this system in London. And this site system is now telling me everything I've got in the London site and what my risks are looking like in that site. So it may be that what I want to do is understand why this asset has got a high risk score that it has. So I can click it and then look at the particular asset. It's a controller. We can see what's loaded in that controller. It's got 4 cards within it, 2 PLCs, 2 comms cards. So damage against or an attack against this one would take them all out. So that's one of the issues I talked about earlier on. I can see it's a door panel stamping controller. My demo environment is one of a small car manufacturer. So imagine all of the systems you'd have, such as an engine plant, body shop, paint shop. All of those parts are what you would typically see. So when we look at our inventory as a whole, then I can easily group by the types of things I do. So location here will give me exactly that view. If I could only find it, there we are. Now we can see data center, DMZ, engine shop, office, paint shop, press shop. All of those assets are broken down according to what I have within the environment. So when I click on one, I'll be taken back to that asset and we can see what it is again. We can see also that it's a Siemens device. We can see what source saw it, what sensor actually picked it up. We can see information such as its raise risk model. Those letters I talked to you about earlier on. These are the profile risks associated with the raise risk model. So if I click my link, I'll see what that raise risk model looks like. So I can have that stored for people as well to understand. I can geotag assets, so I can see exactly where the asset sits within my organization. So once again, that becomes extremely useful in distributed environments where I don't know where an asset may actually be located. And of course, I can see lots of information which is really useful. What its serial number is, its hardware order number. Should a device fail, I can look this up, order a new one, get that placed in. Which version, all of this is automatically captured, by the way. It doesn't have to be manually entered in. This is the level of detail we will get when we look at any asset. Now, I'll also get a list of the vulnerabilities this asset has. And so I can look at the critical vulnerabilities associated with it. So what it is, what the descriptions are, what the solutions that that we advise and the vendor provides to solving the problem. And of course, there are further resources you can click on to see what further information it is. So we capture an awful lot of very useful data that you may wish to understand. And of course, we have that critical VPR score in there, which tells me how at risk am I. So for example, this critical one is hardly worth looking at this point. It's really got a low VPR, but it's got a very high CVSS score. So that says I'm not really at risk from it, not as much as you think, but I am at risk, from other things. If I sort this out, I can see the highest risk I've got on this particular one is 6. It may be that I don't take action until it reaches 7. Indeed. So that is very useful in that ability to control what I do. Now, other useful things about this level of detail is when we look at, say, other controllers. For example, I might want to look at all reactor elements in my reactor system. And so we can bring them all together. And therefore, so just typing the name of one thing will pull the tags associated with all of those devices. So this is a business unit or a functional unit. A reactor may have, it's a PLC, it's a controller, it's an engineering station, and a HMI, compromising that one system. Easily accessible just by typing its name. And when I look at that, I can ask questions such as, is the system running? Is it faulted? And maybe I want to update that. And that's an active query. I just run one of those, and as you can see, the date's just been updated. That's how simple active queries can be to run, to get. But another thing I might want to know is, what is it running? What code is running? And we will capture the operational code in that machine as well. What program is running in there? And we can snapshot that at any time if the code changes, or even automatically capture the snapshot of code changes within that system. And indeed, if I want to know whether any update was made, I can look at the event log for this system and see anything that happened against it. We saw some asset rediscovery. It went offline. We saw that somebody tried to brute force it. We saw an unencrypted FTP and telnet session against it.
The actual events. Mm-hmm.
All these are all events against it. And it's really useful to understand that when I go to an asset like that, then that will happen in real time. So, for example, if I go to a system which would give me, I don't know, this is just a simple email system for monitoring my events against assets. And I'm just going to go and delete them all. Okay, so we start from a clean slate. He says, hopefully, just so that'll be a clean slate. If I can just tell it to delete all the assets, I have to do it slowly. You get the idea. I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll just wish I could do it simply, but all I'm going to do is just make an access to the reactor system directly. That one is not going to where I was. It's 110.254.10.10 if I remember rightly. Was it 253? Might be 253. There we are. So that's gained access to this controller. This is actually the controller we were just looking at. And I might want to log whenever that happens, that comes in as an email And so I can set that up so that it would literally just making it access to such a system would generate an event. So you'll typically see this. I've got this one. It should work well against. So this is another PLC. It's a Schneider PLC. Just accessing that PLC should actually go and generate an email on it, and that will actually, it should just come in. It's not 13th of January today, is it? Maybe I've got, no, it's just come in now. There we are. So that is literally just happened because I accessed this machine, which is the escalator controller, over an unencrypted connection. So that real-time alerting is incredibly useful. And look at the information we're providing, even in the email. All that lovely detail of information is being provided about the source and the destinations. So this is a great way of protecting you when something doesn't have a secure connection like this one. I might just want to log that fact and then generate alerts about that. So we have a very rich data collection environment which can monitor for lots of different things: controller activities, validation, discovery events, network threats.
It's practically like a SIEM solution for OT environment.
It's already there. It's already doing many of those things.
All of the events.
Correct.
Yeah,
correct.
But what it's doing is it's showing this can link up with an existing SIEM or a SOC service anyway. So
Yes.
what we're doing is obviously generating the specific OT events and sending the important ones up to the SIEM for the analysis.
Yes.
So one thing it's just common that people want to do is they might say, I want to know if I've got any devices here which are end of life. Certainly controllers can often last for many, many years. So it may be all I need to do is just look for that, and I can either have a name filter or I can make a filter. And so this time I'm just going to look for a hardware change. So where are we? We're going to look for hardware state, and we look for discontinued and end of life. We'll look for those two. And this then is a list of all discontinued and end of life systems. That would be, my boss says to me, give me a list of all discontinued and end of systems. If you can just stick them in a spreadsheet, and you know what that means that's like a morning's work. In our system, it's the press of a button, and that then gets turned into an Excel spreadsheet straight away. And now that's my list.
And that in some industry, it's very common, to have old devices, sometimes even not updated devices.
So sometimes I just want to capture this information, pull this in, but once it's here, you've got a very powerful, actionable database that will tell you not only what you have, but also what's happening against it. You get to see the vulnerabilities across all your environments. Often you might come across one where you've seen a new vulnerability, and the question you have is, this is really bad. We've just discovered it. How many assets are at risk? Well, I can just go and look and find all the assets which have that vulnerability. Very easy to pull in. Or it may be that I'm interested in understanding what the findings are. So do I have any misconfigurations? Am I having policy violations happening in my environment, such as code uploads happening outside working hours, or conversations happening which shouldn't be happening, like I've just shown you? All of these things are actually captured automatically, and then you can process them accordingly. So it's very powerful to bring this in. But what does this look like when it's then brought in to the platform, the Tenable One system? So I'll probably have to just log on as a different account here.
Actually, what you're showing is that the solution itself helps a lot from compliance perspective, because it's showing absolutely what is going on in the environment with every device part of it.
It does, but actually we can go one step further than that, and we can look at it explicitly from a compliance perspective as well. So how am I doing against NIS2? How am I doing against my ISO 27001? Show me any device which is not meeting that compliance requirement in that.
That is great.
Right. So this isn't going to be your entire compliance tooling. this is a great help on your compliance journey. Okay, one of the things we can do to help you understand how you're meeting your SLAs, how you're meeting your configuration and change management, how you're meeting your external risk and so on. So all of these compliance lists and things like that are according to the appropriate compliance processes that you want to actually live by. Okay, so it can be very useful for that. But this information then passes into our cloud managed platform as well. So here I can then see what my exposure management looks like for all systems. So all of the systems I showed you, the paint shop, the assembly shop, all of that kind of stuff comes into my environment here. And then we can see what those facilities are here, how my security is looking like across the factory for each of these levels and each of these subsystems. Can be really useful for understanding that. I can also see what my attack path matrix is looking like, what my misconfigurations and vulnerabilities are looking like. So it may be that I'm interested in understanding how somebody can gain access to one of my controllers and see information about that. So can they pivot using a particular ICS technique to gain access from one system into another? So can I go from an engineering station to this controller through its backplane into an I/O device? All of that kind of information is visible and understandable from this simple tool. So it's a very powerful way of understanding what my general assets look like, but also any particular exposure signals I'm interested in monitoring. So, for example, here I can start building particular things I'm looking for to correlate particular kind of events together, because these are things I'm really interested in. Do I have any crown jewels with attack paths? Crown jewels being the devices I think are the most important ones in my environment. Do I have some internet exposed devices with remotely exploitable vulnerabilities? I can design and build my own custom systems. Show me my reactor chain weaknesses, for example, or my high-risk OT assets. These are things I can just easily build by just deciding what it is I want to measure, which assets I'm going to include in that, and with a natural query language, build my queries in this way. Save them, and then have them so that they're easily visible, and I can look to see what these look like. So they can be very powerful in building that, and they will also build me a trend analysis should these actually have some data. It's not going to be much data in this at the moment, but you'll get the idea that you can then do this trend analysis on the data that comes in. Okay.
Absolutely.
Then
the reporting part was very, very important, and you have shown a lot very important aspects.
I'll just finish
exposure management. Sure.
I'll just finish with this thing, because I know we're probably running time now, but all of these workspaces where you see everything happening, if you ever need to go back to the source of the information, you can always go back to OT exposure. And that way will log you back into the original system, the original Tenable OT system. Then you can go to the source of the data and see exactly what was happening and understand it. So yes, we bring everything into the platform, but that doesn't mean you give up anything at all, because it's all there. Should you need to go back to the source and understand what's happening, it's all there from an inventory perspective, from an asset perspective. All of that is available. And should you have other assets and other systems, that information will be feeding into this as well.
I should say that the demo was impressive. In a very, very short time, Dominic, you have managed to show so many functionalities, features, even the reporting of the platform itself. I hope the audience are going to like it, I'm sure, because I really liked it, what you have been showing. During the podcast, I have managed to understand what are the main unique selling points of Tenable. There are many, in my opinion. Practically, it can be used in every industry, and the functionality it's outstanding. I would like to say thank you also to both of you, to Chris and to you, about the time during this podcast. It was really, really interesting, and I hope to see you in the next one.
That's great. Well, thank you for
Thank you very much.
having us.
Yes, thank you very much.